Doing a daily Bible devotional has been the best thing that I've done for myself. My time in the Old Testament only proves to me again and again and again that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked above all things. When I'm reading the New Testament, I read it within the context of when Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Everything in the New Testament is just an expansion of one of those two thoughts. Those are the two lenses through which I think with my mouth open as I read through the Old and New Testaments. Join me, won't you, for another adventure in Coffee, the Bible, and Page. Get your coffee and your Bible and join me, won't you? Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another day in the Lord's neighborhood, and welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Page. I am Page, your caffeine-imbued host. Here's my coffee. You know what's coming next. In the beginning, coffee, and lo, it was very, very good. In fact, it was so good, I'm going to have another sip. I was up late last night. Today, we're going to continue our journey in 1 Samuel. And Saul has mustered an army, and he's in conflict with the Philistines who have invaded, and most of his army has just vanished into the dark. He's got about 600 people, and he's facing a large Philistine army, largely outnumbered. And that's kind of where we were left at the last end of chapter 13. So this chapter highlights some really unbalanced thinking on Saul's part. Saul was the king the people wanted, but he doesn't have a strong moral center, a strong spiritually moral center, I should say. I'm discovering some things about Saul that disturbed me, and not out of a self-righteous thing like, oh, Israel deserves better kind of disturbed, but I see in Saul some elements of my personality. And isn't that the reason we do devotionals? I know it's the reason I do devotionals. The reason I've come to use for doing devotionals. It isn't just to learn something about the Bible. It's to have the Bible do its job in my life. In the past, when we talked about the tabernacle, there was a piece of furniture in the tabernacle called the laver. And the laver was a basin made out of mirrors that they had brought with them out of Egypt. So it was highly reflective, and it was filled with water. And it was And if you were entering the tabernacle, the courtyard, you'd come up to the bronze altar, and that's as far as the non-priests could go. We've talked about that. And then behind the bronze altars, where the priest stood and ministered to the non-priests, the other people of Israel, and behind them and off to one side was the laver. The priests were under strict instructions that before they went to work at the bronze altar or before they went to work inside the tent, they had to stop off at the laver and wash their hands and feet. Now, this is everything in the tabernacle is a type or symbol of something else that we see in our Christianity today. In this case, the laver is a type of God's word. The laver was reflective. God's word's reflective. The laver is where the priests went to cleanse themselves before serving God. The Bible should be that for us. We should be in the Bible every day. And as we go into the Bible and read it and ingest it and bring it into our heart and minds, it cleanses us. And the mirror aspect of the laver, in my mind's eye, because I've got a great imagination, I can see the priest coming up and looking into it and seeing a reflection of himself. Isn't that what the Bible does for us? The Bible reflects back to us. And we can see and we discover those areas that need to be cleansed. That's what the Bible does for me, and that's what the devotional reading of the Bible does for me. I'm not doing a deep dive into the original languages like I've mentioned before. I'm just meditating, thinking aloud to myself. That's my tagline. Thinking with my mouth open. That's what I do. And I'm discovering that the scripture throws a reflection of me back to me and highlights the areas that need cleansing. That's kind of what happened with me today. I've always been a take charge kind of guy. But in the past, rarely was I a take charge kind of guy that took charge while walking with God. God rarely played a part in my decisions as someone who is in charge. And that's as it was for my family when I was in charge, as I'm in charge with my family, or when I was at work as a manager. I'm ashamed to say that in the past I would pay lip service to God and not really involve him in my decisions. And the really important big decisions that came along, I didn't involve him at all. And there were disastrous results in my life. I've shared my story with you about how I went through bankruptcy because I would not listen to God or even see. It's not that I didn't listen, which I wasn't. I didn't even seek him out on some of these really big decisions. So, but at the same time, while I was going through all this, from the outside, you'd see Paige being a spiritual man. I talked about God a lot, but I really wasn't praying much. I really wasn't reading the Bible very much. God was not part of my life, even though from the outside looking in, it looked like he was. That's the disturbing thing about Saul. I'm seeing my reflection in him. And that's what the Word of God is there for. It's a laver. It reflects back. It reflects me back to me. Now it's going to be up to me to address these areas that it highlights for me. So that's why I like doing these devotionals. And that's when I read the story of Saul, I'm disturbed. Because he is me. So let's read the story. Where we're at right now, there are two armed encampments, Philistines and Israel. And let's see what's going on here. Chapter 14. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he didn't tell his father. Probably a smart move. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah? These names mess me up. Who was wearing an ephod. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. All right, right here. Saul was staying, and he had descendants of a disgraced line of priests around him as his spiritual advisors, apparently. Where was Samuel? You'd think Samuel would be here. This is an important event. This is an important thing. Samuel's not even mentioned in the story. It's like Samuel's not even there. You know, you're going to discover this about, at least I'm discovering this about Saul. You're going to discover about Saul that he prefers to have people around him who will do what he wants, which is kind of important if you're a king. You don't want people fighting you, but he's surrounded by yes men, is my opinion. And he'd rather have the descendants of a disgraced priest's family than Samuel, because Samuel will tell Saul what he needs to be told. He won't necessarily tell Saul what Saul wants to hear. And I get the feeling that Samuel and Saul are not on great terms. Anyway, he's got the descendants of this disgraced priestly line apparently giving him advice. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Sena. One cliff stood to the north towards Michmash, the other to the south toward Geba. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." Now, this is the act of real faith. He's not assuming God will do anything. He says, perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Let's go find out. And he says, and if he does, nothing can hinder the Lord from saving. He says, the two of us should be able to take out that camp if God's with us. Let's go find out if God is with us. Do all that you have in mind, his armor bearer said. Go ahead. I'm with you heart and soul. Jonathan said, come on then. We will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we'll stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. So Jonathan, at the beginning of this, is keeping his eyes open, hoping to see what God is going to do. He's not going in half-cocked. He's going as far as he dares to. And he says, now, the Lord will show us what's going to happen next. And he says, if they say this, we'll do this. If they say this, we'll do that. But let's see what God has. That will be the sign, he says, that the Lord has given them into our hands. So both of them showed themselves at the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, let's go. Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet with his armor-bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about half an acre. Now, later on in verse 21, we find out that there were a number of Israelites who were with the Philistines in that camp, who had allied themselves with the Philistines. Or maybe they'd been enslaved and conscripted by the Philistines. I always used to wonder, how could Jonathan get the jump and surprise these Philistines when they invited him to the camp and knew he was coming in? The only thing I can think of is that the Philistines thought Jonathan and his armor-bearer were deserting Saul, therefore calling them up to their camp. They didn't see them as enemies. They saw them as cowardly soldiers from Israel, and they were going to let them surrender themselves. This would give Jonathan and his companion a real opportunity to surprise them. I kind of think that's what happened here. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp, in the field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. You know, when somebody follows after God truly, huge things can happen. Jonathan and his armor-bearer, by themselves, were able to slaughter that entire outpost. And maybe some of the Israelites that were with them, that we're going to read about in verse 21, maybe they helped. I don't know. But that one victory, for some reason, was the event that unleashed something into the midst of the Philistine troops, all of them, in all the camps, not just where Jonathan was. And they were confused. The ground shook, and a panic was sent by God to all of the Philistine army. Saul's lookouts at Gibeah and Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, now this is confusing to me. Muster the forces and see who has left us. When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor-bearer who were not there. The army is melting away. They're in confusion. They're running. And Saul's first concern was, who's not here? He's treating this like it's a criminal act. You know, it's like, we got to find out who's not here. He has 600 men. Do you think it took a little bit of time to figure out that Jonathan and his armor-bearer weren't there? The enemy's in full retreat, and Saul takes a census. Curious about what was causing the Philistine flight, and perhaps considering the possibility of helping to turn it into a rout, Saul decided once again to take a census of his troops, but this time to see whether any of them had left the camp and maybe were responsible for the Philistine panic. This is not the time for that. Maybe later. He should have unleashed his army at that point. That's what a military leader would have done. The enemy is in full retreat. Jump him. So this is, again, one of the confusing aspects of Saul. Sometimes he appears to be a military genius. Other times, when it's really crunch time, he's very unsure of himself. I just don't know what in the world is going on with Saul. Saul said to Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God." At that time, it was with the Israelites. And so while Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Paul said to the priest, "Withdraw your hand." All right. It looks like Saul was getting ready to carry the ark into battle as a superstitious attempt to guarantee victory. But he hears the noise getting louder and louder and louder of the Philistines, who were just totally falling apart. And he stops the priest's preparations to pick up the ark and move it. And he decided to jump into battle with his men. But at the same time, without the benefit of priestly blessing. Sometimes Saul appears to be a religiously minded man. Other times he appears just to be something else. He's a religious man when it suits him. He calls upon God, or gives a semblance of calling upon God, when it suits him. And the impression I'm beginning to get of Saul is that he really wants to look like he's in charge, to inspire confidence to people. I get that. That's the way I was when I was a manager in a satellite communications company. I always believed that the best job to have was the one where you were in charge, because you could benefit the most people. That was my reasoning. And I always pursued leadership positions. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I realized that God played very little in my leadership decisions. No wonder I failed, ultimately, at being a manager. No wonder that company fired me. I wasn't a persecuted Christian. I was an inadequate leader. Saul, on the outside, in many aspects, looks like he's got it all together. He's a godly man pursuing God's enemies. But at the same time, you get pictures like the Philistines are running away, and he stops to take a census to find out who's missing. The Philistine camp is going absolutely bananas. And he goes and gets the ark, thinking if we carry the ark into battle, it'll save us. That's superstitious. That's not spirituality. That's a superstitious act. And then he decides, you know what? Let's just go after it. Let's get after it. They're running away. This isn't a true battle, by the way. The enemy is in flight. They're not stopping and gathering. This isn't two armies facing each other in the battlefield. God has already inflicted fear on the Philistines, and all Saul's army has to do is chase them down and kill them. So this isn't a military decision. This isn't a Patton-like military maneuver on Saul's part. The enemy was running away. All Saul's army has to do is chase after them, which is kind of a good thing because they don't have many weapons. So I imagine they would chase after the army and then take their weapons from them. But let's keep on going. Verse 20. Saul and his men assembled and went to battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines and had gone up with them to their camp went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they too joined the battle in hot pursuit. So on that day, the Lord saved Israel, and the battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. All right, so he has his 600 men, and there were men who were with the Philistines in this camp, a small amount of men, but then there were a large contingent of Israelites who had been hiding in the mountains who came to join Saul when they saw the Philistines running away. All at once, Saul was once again commander of a large army, and they were in hot pursuit, striking the Philistines down. Now, the Israelites were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath. Again, this is Saul sounding spiritual, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before the evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." Do you see the problem here? They're his enemies. Don't let anybody eat anything until I have avenged myself on my enemies. Now, on the outset, this looks very much like a general's attitude in battle. I mean, he's taking charge, but he makes a really foolish command. Don't anybody eat anything until I'm done with my enemies. I thought this was God's battle. I know. You know, this is the part about Saul that disturbs me because that's me. When I was faced with stressful situations, I took charge because that's what a leader does. But did I consult God? No. So the entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. Yet, when they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out, yet no one put his hand to his mouth because they feared the oath. Don't eat anything, Saul had said. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath, so he reached out to the end of his staff that's in his hand, dipped it in the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. In other words, he got renewed energy. It's funny how food will do that for you. One of the soldiers told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food today.' That's why the men are faint." Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little bit of this honey? How much better would it have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from the enemies? Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been even greater? In fact, they probably could have broken the back of Philistia if Saul had made a smart command decision. He tried to make it a religious thing. He should have told his people, get something to eat and get back at it. They could have destroyed Philistia that day. That day, after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Aijalon, they were exhausted. Of course they were. No food. They pounced on the plunder, and taking sheep, cattle, and calves, they butchered them on the ground and ate them together with their blood. In fact, they didn't even give the animals time to drain all the blood out, which eating meat with blood in it is a big no-no. Then someone said to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it." "You have broken faith," he said. "Roll a large stone over here at once." Then he said, "Go out among the men and tell them, each of you bring me your cattle and sheep and slaughter them here and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood in it." See, that's a very religious, spiritual sounding thing. He's taking charge of the spiritual life of his people. So everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he'd done this. Now, that's actually a pretty damning statement. Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this. Anybody could build an altar to the Lord. It's just you take a stone or a rock, and upon that rock you offer a sacrifice, and you make it a holy place by worshiping God there. But up until this point, Saul had never done this. That's a pretty telling statement about his piety. A special point is made. This is the first time Saul had ever done this. And it seems to me like that's a negative comment as to his relationship or his piety his relationship with God. Saul said, let's go down and pursue the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them alive. Now, the priests told him, do whatever seems best to you. That's some real good advice. But the priest said, let us inquire of God here. Okay, well, that seems like a reasonable request. So Saul asked God, shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hands? What else do you need to know? The Philistines are running away in total, complete retreat. This is a spiritual sounding request, but come on, Saul. There's a Bible study out there called by Harold Blackaby. And in it, it's a study on discovering the will of God, how to discern the will of God. And I think it's called Experiencing God. I can't remember. But anyway, this pastor, is Canadian pastor, he says that most of our discernment can be based on observation of what's going on around us. For instance, he said he was a pastor of a church that had a lot of medical personnel, and it's a church in Canada. And so they would send out missionary teams of medical people to the indigenous nations, native nations around them in towns and cities, and do medical missionary work among them, bringing medicine, treatments, etc. And he said then he pastored another church that was full of carpenters, builders, woodworkers, construction people. And he said, wouldn't it have been stupid to send those people out on medical things because that's what used to work in the other church? He said, no, I'm surrounded by people who can work with their hands. So they sent out missionary teams from that church to build homes, to build buildings, to repair places as missionary teams. He looked at his circumstances, and that dictated his decisions. Well, Saul asked, shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? Duh. What are the circumstances, Saul? So he's making, though, what sounds like a spiritual sounding request, but it's a stupid request. I think the circumstances dictate you have the Philistines on the run, get after it. But God did not answer him that day. I'm wondering if it's because, Saul, come on. Remember that joke or that story? There's a flood, and a man's on top of the roof of his house waiting for the flood waters are engulfing his home, and a boat comes, and he cries out to God to deliver him, and people in a rowboat come by and says, jump in the boat. He says, no, God's got this. And they go away. And a helicopter comes flying by. Hey, we'll pick you up. No, God's got this. They leave. Well, the floodwaters engulf the house, and the man dies. And he's in heaven. He's standing before God, and he says, God, where were you? I called on you to save me. And he said, I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. What more do you need? And here's Saul, sounding all spiritual and nice, saying spiritual sounding things, but it's so shallow. Shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? But God did not answer him that day. In fact, I believe God had answered him with the circumstances, but Saul was not listening. Saul therefore said, come here, all you who are leaders of the army, and let's find out what sin has been committed today. God won't talk to me. It must be your fault. As surely as the Lord who rescues Israel lives, even if the guilt lies with my son Jonathan, he must die. But not one of them said a word, because they knew it was Jonathan. Saul then said to the Israelites, you stand over there. I and Jonathan my son will stand over here. Do what seems best to you, they replied. Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant today? If the fault is in me or my son Jonathan, respond with Urim. But if the men of Israel are at fault, respond with Thummim. That's the way they had of casting lots. Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the men were cleared. Saul said, "Cast a lot between me and Jonathan, my son," and Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little bit of honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die." Then Saul says a very spiritual sounding thing. He says, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." At this point, Jonathan's men have had it. But the men said to Saul, "Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. For he did this today with God's help." Saul was not the victor of the day. His son Jonathan was. So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. They would not let the king touch him. Then Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own land. If he had not wasted his time with this foolish endeavor, they could have absolutely broken the back of the Philistines. And he'd made a foolish pronouncement, and he was ready to execute his own son, Jonathan. The one person in his family that was listening to God and that was really, truly looking for God, Jonathan was ready to kill him. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side. All right, this is kind of like just a summary of his rule. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. Now, Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The name of his older daughter was Merab, and that of the younger was Michal. His wife's name was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of Saul's army was Abner, son of Ner, and Ner was Saul's uncle. Saul's father Kish and Abner's father Ner were sons of Abiel. All the days of Saul there was bitter war with the Philistines, and whenever Saul saw a mighty or brave man, he took him into his service. Saul was successful in spite of himself. Apparently he knew something of generalship because he was successful in these other campaigns. But the big thing about this story that so bothers me is, first of all, where was Samuel? The one truly godly man who could give him God's words, who was God's spokesperson. Where was he? Why wasn't he around Saul? Was that Samuel's fault? Or was it Saul's fault? I don't know. But when I look at the way Saul is handling himself, he makes religious-sounding, spiritual-sounding pronouncements, but yet he does whatever it is he wants to do, as opposed to Jonathan, who's seeking God throughout his entire encounter with the Philistines, who's got his eyes open. Let's see what God's going to do. And if the Philistines do this, that's God telling us we can do that. Where Saul just makes foolish pronouncements, promising death to anybody who eats anything during the battle. That's not a general's wisdom. To me, Saul is becoming more and more a person who's very much interested in how the public perceives him. And he'll say what he needs to say to make himself look the way he wants the people to see him. That's the impression I'm getting. And again, that's what disturbs me about him, because that was me in a lot of ways. I've discovered in my elder years that I'm not nearly the spiritual man or godly man that I thought I was. I believe God is sovereign and that he's worked all the details of my life out for my good. I get that. I understand that. And that he can take even the most improper decisions I've ever made and turn it to work to my good. I get that. But at the same time, I see proof inside me that in many ways, I'm very much like Saul, the king here. Some things I get right, some things I don't. But when I was in charge, when I was in a leadership position, I did what I thought was right in my own eyes. And I did not consult with God. And that led to a very dark time in my life that God has delivered me from. So, once again, God's word does what God's word does. Shines a light, reflects me to me, and reminds me that I need to involve God in every aspect of my life. Now, in closing, I will say one of the lessons I've learned from all this is that I pray to God almost continually throughout the day. I'm not on my knees all the time, not doing anything else but praying, but I talk to God throughout the entire day. And one of the most common prayers that I pray comes out of an element of the Roman Catholic Mass, the Kyrie, where the penitent is asking God for mercy. He says, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Kyrie eleison. Christos eleison. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. I don't ask God for things anymore. I ask God for mercy. I ask God for grace. I ask God to let me see Him working around me so that I can do the right thing at the right time. I can't recall the last time I asked God for anything material. God's going to provide me my needs. What I really need is to have my heart changed. What Saul really needs is to have his heart changed. And unfortunately, we're going to see that doesn't happen. So we'll just leave it there. I'm Paige. Here's my coffee. Lo, it is still very good. I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye. So, what did you think about today's Bible devotional? Email me and let me know your thoughts at ffog@me.com.